The information expressed in the following podcast is intended for educational purposes only and was created by and belongs solely to Believe Limited and the Flow podcast and does not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Please speak to your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions.
Hi, I'm Jessica and welcome to Flow. I'm here as always with Sarah Watson, sex therapist, and today we have the Sexvangelicals. That's right, you heard me right. You're going to hear more very soon, but first we all want to know, how's your flow? It's like really slow music, but we like to dance like it's like a club. Welcome once again to Flow. We start off Flow with a little check-in to normalize the reality of menstruation. We're just going to let you know how we're all flowing, starting with Sarah.
I have no idea what's happening. Usually I know, but I don't know. Because I don't know. I went to the gynecologist today. I'll tell you that. That was a delight this morning. I love her. I just went back to my old doc and she gave me a hug. So it was a great day with me and my vulva. So nice. I think I'm luteal, but I've been traveling and stuff, so I don't know what's going on. How about
interesting
you?
Travel?
Yeah.
Travel does disrupt the normal flow we find collectively. Everyone's nodding for those listeners. Mm-hmm. Those of us who menstruate are nodding. Travel changes things.
Yes.
Being in one place changes things. I've been on this show continually luteal. This is the first time I think I'm follicular. So I know there's a slight difference. Mm-hmm. I can reach a higher register with my voice. I don't know. I feel like hormonally a little bit more up and up.
I love that.
Yeah. And Julia, how are you flowing?
Well, my breasts are throbbing and I'm ovulating.
All right.
Wow. Telltale sign.
Yes. I made the mistake of going to a spin class with a sports bra that wasn't tight enough. And spin isn't even as high impact as running, but even the ups and the downs was quite uncomfortable. And I thought to myself, well, you're definitely ovulating, and rookie mistake. You got to wear the tight, supportive ones when you're ovulating.
I say all the time.
That's true. That's true.
Right? But definitely during ovulation, but even any kind of thing. Oh, just keep them. I don't want them moving around when I'm exercising.
Right. And a little bit more fatigued than typical, a little crampy. So I don't like to take it easy, but I have needed to ramp down some things over the past couple days.
Now, you said throbbing as opposed to tenderness, and just because listeners always like to dissect symptoms, can you describe the difference? Is it tender versus a throb?
I would say when I menstruate, it is more tender. When I ovulate, it feels like a pulsating almost, and like a heaviness more than a sensitivity. But the heaviness feels like a bruise.
Ooh. That makes sense. That makes sense completely. Mm-hmm.
What a lovely articulation of the experience of menstruation. And just like the experience of menstruation, the experience of sex is not often talked about. But luckily today on Flow, we're going to talk about the sex education the church didn't want you to have. But first, we're going to take this quick break.
This ad is brought to you by Von Vendy, Von Willebrand Factor Recombinant.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I didn't always feel empowered to speak up for myself or ask for the care and support I needed. Becoming part of a community and hearing other people's experiences helped to change my perspective. That's why my deciding factor is making my voice heard. To hear my story and access other helpful resources, drop by Von Vendy, that's VONVENDI.com/patient-stories.
Welcome back. Here we go. Today you have Jessica, Sarah, your Flow hosts, and we have Julia and Jeremiah, Boston-based Sexvangelicals. Find them online. That's SEXVANGELICALS. They offer resources online, including how to prepare to leave a fundamentalist community. We four have been talking about making this conversation happen now for months. We are so excited to be sitting down with you. Thanks again for flowing with us today, Julia and Jeremiah.
Yay.
Thank you. This is exciting.
And Jeremiah, just so we can hear your voice a little bit more on the podcast too, can you tell us what your thoughts are on jumping on a menstrual podcast?
Yeah, so it's funny. I had a meeting today for a conference that I'm working on. And one of four people, the other three people all menstruate. And I was just checking in, and I was saying, I'm on this podcast later today, and I've been doing some research on the intersection of religion and religious history and menstruation. And I told them, I might drop like one or two just like random facts, but mainly like I'm going to sit back, shut up, and like let women talk about the process of menstruation, or people who are menstruating talk about the process of menstruation, because men talk way too much about that and don't know what the hell's going on. And one of the people said, actually, Jeremiah, I'd encourage you strongly not to do that, because we need more men talking about menstrual health. We need more men talking about and understanding the process of menstruation. So that was encouraging, and
Yes, yeah.
thankful for that conversation. And Julia, you've reinforced that idea in prepping for this podcast as well. So
I really appreciate when either men or people who don't menstruate engage conversations about menstruation in a really matter-of-fact kind of way, or elicit dialogue about it. I think that's a feminist move.
Agreed.
Yes.
Yes, it's very powerful.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're here on purpose, Jeremiah. We want you to be part of this convo for sure,
Great.
particularly
Yes.
as you too, Jeremiah and Julia, your expertise in understanding and dissecting, departing from what the church might have to say about sex education and finding your own path to do the work you do now. The way it relates to menstruation is that, of course, there is a relational component to menstrual health. And often relationships where we might be sharing intimate details of our menstrual health are with those we might be having sex with.
Mm-hmm.
And so we also want to keep in mind extreme menstruation. We're talking about not just the regular flow, but when things are more intense. So that's my preamble. Now you two, Julia and Jeremiah, are in a relationship. How did you two first foster the space to talk about menstrual health with each other?
Despite growing up in a context in which menstruation was not a topic on the table anywhere, very taboo, I have, generally speaking, been pretty comfortable talking about menstrual health. I didn't receive great sex education. I received terrible sex education. That being said, my mom is a retired labor and delivery nurse. So at the very least, I got anatomically correct information, and my mom was decently open in talking about her menstrual health and what was happening. So not necessarily in the whole family system, but between my mom and I, there was an openness, and I feel pretty comfortable talking with partners or friends about menstrual health in general. I know that's not true for many people. I know that anxiety and vulnerability around this is quite high, but I have been able to do it.
Yes, lead the way. Show us the way. So Jeremiah, how about you? Early education of menstrual realities?
Oh, early education of menstrual realities, not great. I remember the only time that my family talked about it was when my mom was going through menopause. And she experienced some significant pain for probably a year-long period. But my mom didn't talk about it. It was my dad who made comments, and my parents are amazing people. My dad also like hinted in some comments of sexism, unfortunately, when he was talking about my mom's experiences of pain through the menopause process. So I didn't get a lot of information about much sexually related really until about 5 or 6 years ago, when I actually started studying to become a sex therapist. In regards to the question you asked, Julia, like how do we talk about this in a relationship? I don't know, Julia, that we create intentional space to talk about menstrual health. But I think, Julia, you do a really good job at just telling me like what's going on in your body. You'll tell me about what's going on in your body at large, and very often that's related to pelvic pain. That's related to how your breasts are doing, like what you're saying earlier, regarded to energy levels, hormonal levels, things like that. But I'd like to get into a space in a relationship where I'm the one that initiates those conversations, as well as you initiating that information with me. So
The only caveat I would say is that I think we have intentional conversations about our bodies and sexuality. So we don't necessarily have conversations about menstruation specifically. But I appreciate that part of the normalization and part of the destigmatizing of menstrual health is normalizing it. Right. And although menstrual symptoms are different than what your body is experiencing, when we can take menstruation off the taboo shelf and include it into conversations about our bodies in general, then it doesn't become as scary or, like I said, taboo.
Shaming.
Shaming, yes.
Yes. Great.
And speaking of shame and indoctrination, we have to get to it. We have to get to it. Sexvangelical. And Sarah, I want you to, I'm curious from your understanding of, where the church has played a role in your life and where the Sexvangelicals here have played a role now in helping others unindoctrinate from the church. Yeah. What is your questions, I guess?
Yeah, no, I think it's, I think we probably experienced pretty similar childhoods. So I didn't get that education either. And I've told the story on the podcast before about how I learned how to put a super tampon in when I had to go swimming, and it was terrifying. And my mom was like, here you go. And I'm like a 13 or 14-year-old kid. And you're like, what is this? Where does this go? Right. It was no education. It was just, this is going to happen. Okay. That was it. Maybe there was a book. But I went to religious. I grew up going to a Christian school, elementary school, and that wasn't discussed, right? It wasn't discussed, and it's so harmful, as we all know, and how that can impact everyone around you, especially if it hurts. It's scary too. Like if you're not prepared, and then all of a sudden you go to the bathroom, right, and there's blood everywhere, what can happen, right? Like there's a lot going on there.
And coming from, because I didn't grow up necessarily adjacent to purity culture. Like I had to learn what that was. But I would say that must impact, and correct me if I'm wrong, that impacts how people treat the shame around menstrual health as well.
Absolutely.
Reality.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you both have shared experiences there, and you both, all three of you are now sex therapists. So something about growing up with that led to wanting to deal with sex a lot more or something. Like how did it get started was my question.
Yeah. Well, you use the language of indoctrination. That's perfect language. So when I grew up, I received very rigid messages specifically around gender, sexuality, and relationships. And of course, menstruation is a huge part of all three of those things. Right. So lack of sexual health education had some pretty devastating consequences on my growing up experiences. I also followed the dictates of purity culture. I got married very young. I am divorced. And when I got married, I was anticipating that what the church at large promised me around sexuality would magically come true. It did not. And
spoiler.
Yeah.
Crazy what do they promise? What do they promise? What do they promise?
Right. Essentially, that if you follow all the rules of purity culture, that you will have magical, blissful sex for forever. And
so it's like a cheat code to get good sex? That's the idea? Okay, cool.
Do nothing and then it will be amazing.
Yes.
Cool. It seems like practice would help. But I get, okay, sure.
Right. And I didn't consider this double bind until several years later in sex therapy myself as a client. But there's also this messaging that as a woman, you are less sexual. So I received this mixed message that purity culture was the cheat code to like honeymoon sex and then the rest of your life as the best ever. And then I also learned that my male partner, of course, would want sex all the time, be sexually obsessed, and I would be less interested. So I received both of those messages at the same time, and that's a real mind fuck.
Yeah. Cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
Yes, better. More appropriate language.
Mindfuck works. Let's be serious.
Yeah.
And cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And I've been a client in sex therapy. So each person, each couple has a different story, but that gives me a huge degree of empathy because I know what it's like to walk into a room with a sex therapist, especially coming from a religious background and not only having shame around sexuality in general, but having shame around my religious background that I didn't choose and wondering how is this sex therapist who is probably having the best sex life ever going to think about me and my lack of sex education and the terrible anxiety and distress I was having about sex. So whenever I have a new client and just in practice in general, I always remember that like vulnerable moment of walking into a room with a stranger to talk about sex, which is, to go full circle, just not discussed along with menstruation in in the religious communities that Sarah and Jeremiah and I were raised and or indoctrinated in.
Right. And Julia, you got much more actual negative kind of fear-mongering sex education than I did, both as a woman, and then also the specific denomination that you were a part of. My specific background had a hell of a lot to say about gender and the performance of gender roles, which maybe we can get into later, but was actually pretty silent about the process of sex. So whereas Julia, you were receiving a lot of the information about what we refer to on the podcast as the deadly sexual sins according to the church. Don't have sex before you get married. Don't be gay. Those types of things. Like a lot of that was silent. Body, sexuality, just not mentioned at all. And I grew up in the public schools in Texas. So there was the conversations that we had about sexuality were almost exclusively about STIs and pregnancy, with the implication that if we talk about this, we'll like scare you into the practice of abstinence until marriage, which I by and large adhered to actually. So so one of the things that's important for me then is as someone who like loves reading, someone who loves like learning about the world, there's this whole like gap of information over the first 30 to 35 years of my life that like just no one ever talked to me about. And it's really important to me in my work as a relationship therapist, my work as a sex therapist to give as much accurate information about what goes on in our bodies, what goes on in our relationships as we can. So
wait, I have to go back to one thing that was said earlier, which is that when you sit down with a sex therapist, you're sitting down with someone who's just like having great sex. So is that true? You're all three sex therapists. When you're a sex therapist, do you just like you just have a great sex life?
It ebbs
Not
and flows.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, depends on what's happening, right? Just like everybody else. We just have extra knowledge that the general public doesn't. I mean, you go for it, you guys. Tell me what you think.
I would say that, like, Julia, you and I have a good sex life, but it's not because we're sex therapists.
Right.
It's because you and I are intentional about talking about sexuality, talking about what we like with each other, talking about what we want, talking a little bit about our dynamic. But even then, like there's growth areas. I imagine that the way that we will be talking about sex and sexuality in the next 3 years, 5 years will be like infinitely more helpful and effective than what we're doing now.
Yeah.
So
I think our sex. I've been with my partner for 21 years, and so our sex life absolutely changed because I was more open and able to communicate effectively while I was learning and understanding my own body. But just like everybody else, we have stressors and concerns, and low desire can creep in there. And as everyone knows on our podcast, we have a tiny person, and that energy just can get sucked up real quick, and I just want to go to sleep, right? Or I'm just like, hey, I need to rest, and really honoring my body too we were definitely, I'm assuming you two were not taught this. I was not taught to honor my body in the capacity of rest. It was like, honor your body because you need to be pure for God and Jesus, not anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And to link that to menstruation, even over the past couple of days, I'm at this spin class, and again, I love an intense exercise. And even some of those shame messages around don't rest came up. And then I was thinking about our podcast today and thinking about, I also know I'm ovulating. I'm also like hearing my body tell me to slow down, that that's what it wants and that's what it needs. And I certainly didn't grow up with any sexual health education around menstruation, even though I had anatomically correct language, but that doesn't include the bulk of menstrual health. And so I didn't learn that my body would feel different at different times of the day or different times of the month. And then that would dictate different things as an individual. And then if you're in any kind of partnership structure, different things sexually, different things emotionally, different things conversationally, et cetera, et cetera.
I would say the only thing I learned, just kind of coming from that, was that we could blame PMS, right, for our mood shift, but that was it. It wasn't, hey, listen to your body and what it needs. It's, oh, I'm being bitchy because I'm PMSing, and it was an excuse versus an understanding.
Well, and Sarah, men also use PMS as a way to dismiss women in this
all the time
misogynist, sexist kind of way.
Yes.
Yeah. And what's interesting is I know that this is something that you had mentioned in a question later, but I think that there's been this overcompensation in some ways, in the sense that PMS symptoms have been so weaponized in sexist and misogynist ways that sometimes folks are less able or willing to say, actually, I am experiencing this hormonal shift, and that is causing me to feel different emotions. That is causing me to have a bodily, physiological response. And so I wish that there were a way to talk about PMS symptoms or just menstruation in general without weaponizing that in the same way that it typically has been historically.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the round of applause, enter here. We do that sometimes. We'll just have that enter here. I'm sure that was maybe related to how is it problematic that the church sees periods as shameful, or period pain, or in general, something to do with that. And could we speak a little bit more of that as someone who did not grow up in the church? We've talked a little bit about what is taught, but what is problematic about what is taught? What is it teaching young menstruators that your work is fixing?
Yeah. That your pain doesn't matter or it doesn't exist. And those are two different things. They there's a Venn diagram in which they overlap, but also your pain not mattering or your pain not existing are also different. And by not talking about sexuality, by not discussing menstrual health in correct ways, that's what we communicate to menstruators of any age.
Right, because when we look at like church history, for instance, there is a lot of kind of precedence around talking about menstruation and menstruating women, and the process of kind of exiling menstruating women in particular ways in the name of, Jessica, to use what you said, in the name of, quote, purity. And in the past, in the ancient world, that was maybe connected a little bit more with sanitation, with public health. But now in the 21st century, and over the last 4, 5, 6 centuries, like that's not an excuse anymore. We have public health, we have sanitation services to navigate that. So I would say that the Christian writers, and we study American evangelicalism and Pentecostal histories. There's actually nothing that is said about pain, about menstrual pain, about pelvic pain. It's pretty exclusive to the historical practices of excluding women during their periods. So it's even going back to like Levitical law, Leviticus 15, talking about women who are menstruating are to go through this purification process, which later down the line in the Talmud, 1,000 years later, involves like being excluded from the community during that process. That's something that's still practiced actually in Eastern Orthodox and in Russian Orthodox traditions. Interestingly, evangelical Christians, as much as they fuck things up, at least women still get to at least women still get to worship while they're menstruating. That's
At the
positive.
very
Good
least.
job, the evangelical church.
Yeah.
Yay! Praise
You get
team.
one. You get one.
But again, like that, to go back, Julia, to what you're saying, like there's very little, if anything, written in Christian tradition about menstrual pain. So speaking again about the silencing of pain.
Sure. And I was thinking about blood earlier today because menstruation involves blood. And this might be a reach, but I was thinking about how particularly American evangelicalism has a pro-military perspective. And when we think about men and people who don't menstruate, that the blood of men is this thing that we honor, that we even worship.
And even the blood of Jesus. This transfers into Christianity as well.
But we don't want the blood of women to exist. And I'm thinking about other ramifications as well. I'm very open in talking about having had 2 pregnancy losses, which is a part of menstrual health. And there's a lot of blood. And I remember when I had my first pregnancy loss, what I knew about pregnancy losses was that you bleed. I didn't know that you bleed a hell of a lot. And we don't want to see the blood of women, but we love, or in people who menstruate, but we love the blood of men.
Ooh.
And the language that we put around the blood of men, that it's sacrificial,
Right.
that these men like fought for what they stand for,
Yeah.
like the meaning, the narrative is 180 degrees different from the language given around menstrual blood.
Yes. And this is a less painful example, but I still think has some interesting cultural implications. I've had 2 experiences, one with Jeremiah, one in a different context, in which I was staying in some sort of Airbnb and got blood on the sheets. And in one context, I sent the hosts a message and said, what happened. And thinking about extreme menstruation, this was after a copper IUD was implanted, and there's a lot of blood. A lot of blood.
So much blood. There's so much blood. Yeah.
I mean, it looked like a murder scene. It was bad. And I'm like, oh no, the hosts are going to think I killed someone. That's probably what's going to happen. I need to make sure they know a murder didn't happen. So I sent them a message, and they had a lovely response, and they said, oh, you don't owe us anything. We have to replace sheets for all different kinds of reasons. And I thought that was such a lovely response. And then at a different context, Jeremiah and I went to an Airbnb. A much smaller degree of blood was on the sheets.
Maybe an inch radius.
I think due to menstruation, but I'm not sure. Blood happens for a lot of reasons. And the host asked for $300 of reimbursement. And if I am ever in the hospitality business, if Jeremiah and I ever do a retreat center, which we've talked about, I will have the strong value that I would never charge a person, especially a person menstruating, for blood on the sheets, because we bleed, and sometimes we bleed a lot. And I don't think that we should punish menstruating people or pregnant people or people who are bleeding for any reason.
You don't ask people not to sweat on sheets.
Right.
Naturally occurring blood is flowing. It's not unnatural as the male blood examples from war. It's naturally occurring blood that might happen, like dirt on the ground. Yeah.
Right.
Or shedding your hair. Like all of these things that happen with our body. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Well, Julie, would you be open to, I just want to, because our listeners were always about diving into the extreme symptom aspects, when you said it's a hell of a lot of blood with pregnancy loss versus, for example, the time in the sheets, different time, but hell of a lot of blood. How much? Can we just quantifying or visualizing or an amount of time that you were bleeding?
Yeah. So thinking about pregnancy loss, you receive from the hospital, if you can, like medical grade, they're not maxi pads, but they're essentially like a medical grade maxi pad. And you, at least I, and many people do, you might bleed through one every 1 or 2 hours for a long period of time. And
Days?
those, yes.
Mhm.
And the hospital version of the maxi pads can hold quite a bit of blood. With the sheets from the IUD, I don't know how much blood there was. And I was not really joking when I said it looked like a murder scene. I remember waking up and the sheets were wet. And I remember actually being a bit scared because the extent of the blood was so extreme.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was today years old when I learned about the PBAC, the pictorial blood assessment chart, which
I
is a
don't-
way that
Yeah.
okay, yeah, okay.
I don't
great.
know.
That is either.
Oh, yeah.
I was today years old too.
Yeah,
is-
Oh my
I
gosh, yeah.
Jay, explain it. But like, this is the hemophilia stuff. Like, that is like.
I was gonna
go
say,
ahead.
yes, Sarah, do you want to? I feel like I'm still a
No.
newbie.
So okay, and you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, because I realize you probably have some information right in front of you. But this is how we teach our young menstruators to measure what is coming out. So it's by use of how many pads or how many tampons are filling up within a certain amount of time. So when you talk about, am I accurate to what you're reading, Jay?
You're totally, and I just
Okay.
wanted to add, because it's this compelling matrix that's been developed to help assess, because it is so challenging to actually contain the volume or to count the volume. But in order to understand extreme scenarios, it's a necessary part of the process for diagnosis. Anyway, so it's about how many pads you fill within how much time, pads versus tampons. They've now added a cup.
Mm-hmm.
What
And what
size?
Yeah.
But there's like a mathematical part so that
Uh-huh.
at the end you get a number to help you determine where you're at. And it's called the PBAC for short, Pictorial Blood Assessment Chart. It's the best
did
thing
not
we have.
know. Wow.
Yeah.
We'll link it. We'll link it in the
Yes.
notes, because it's a really interesting tool. And I have, and I think I've shared this before, but I have clients that are like, oh, my period. And I'm like, okay, well, first, even before I did the show, I'm always like, because I have hemophilia, I'm always listening for people talking about their periods and if they're extreme. And I finally, just this week, just on Monday, convinced a client, I'm like, please, 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 like, I will send you the link. This is what you need to say. You need to go get tested, because bleeding for multiple weeks, filling super tampons so quickly is not normal, right? Like, this is not okay. Something is up, and it's you need to be tested. We need to see what's going on with your clotting factor. And it's a lot. So and I think it's hard. Like those, I'm imagining, Julia, you got what they give us after we give birth too, those super crazy pads that are just, they're like diaper pads, but like
they are almost a diaper,
almost.
but you put them inside your underwear, but they're bigger than your underwear.
Yeah, it's wild. It's a wild time. But that compared to a sheet, because like the sheet is gonna like spread, but I had that copper IUD, and I know what you're talking about, because that is a wild experience. And as a bleeder, it was very extreme for me as well. So
yeah, and I don't quite know how to say this. I'm thinking about how we don't talk about menstrual health in general. We rarely ever talk about extreme periods. And it's almost like you only have pain if it's extreme, and we also don't want to hear about it. And so what I will never say moving forward is easy pregnancy. And I don't think that language of like easy menstrual health is like helpful either, because then there's this connotation that like women are supposed to be in pain and people who menstruate are supposed to be in pain. So that's the default. And if you're not in pain, then it's an easy menstruation or an easy pregnancy, rather than still something that's physiologically very intensive.
every time, right? Every time, even like, every time, every month, if you're menstruating, and every pregnancy, no matter what the outcome. Thank you for saying that. I think that's really, really important.
Right. And I was afraid it was going to sound like a minimization of pain. And as I was talking through it, I was thinking, actually, what it communicates is that pain is the default for menstruation or pregnant people or people who bleed for other reasons.
Right.
Yeah, and attitude towards pain in gender roles is different, as we are prescribed it here in America anyway, where we are recording from and all raised in within the borders of. So, and you mentioned gender roles earlier, Jeremiah. I'm curious both of how the church led into certain ones being prescribed versus what was revolutionary about realizing those are not the necessary status quo.
So the best way to talk about this is when I was a little boy, I was 7. And I had I was part of a Bible study, a small group. And at any given Wednesday, there were anywhere between 8 people, 20 people. And very often I was the only boy. I was the only penis owner there. My dad worked. Some of the other men worked or claimed to work. Sometimes, as I later found out, was my dad. Good on him. Fair.
Get out of there.
But yeah, whole other.
I won't
podcast
criticize.
episode.
Yeah. Okay.
So we get to the Bible study, and this is actually where my church didn't have much to say about sex. They had a hell of a lot to say about gender. The adult women would say, "Well, Jeremiah, you're the boy. You're the penis owner." They didn't say penis owner, of course, because heaven forbid anyone would say penis. I would get run out. You're the boy, so you have to lead the songs. You have to read the scripture. You have to lead the prayer, because women can't do this.
To all these adult women.
Yeah. So I have like 5 adult women like telling me this, and like, good thing I'm a good person, because in like the wrong character situation, like, that's how you develop narcissists. Is that you empower these, in this case, these boys. You don't give them consequences. You tell them people will like bow down to you, essentially, and then you start believing it. So that's kind of the extreme example of how like gender roles got played out. The expectation that boys, that men are, that they lead things, that they run things, that women play passive roles. And that carried all the way over through church leadership into what, Julia, you and I study now, into sex. And there's a multi-million, like 9-digit, $100 million, $200 million publishing industry, the Christian publishing industry, that is centered around the proliferation of these gender roles, specifically regarding sex. That men are expected to be the dominant ones, that they have the penises, so they are like the ones who are like inserting their penis into the woman's vagina, because that's A, the only way sex can happen in these contexts, and B, like, women are expected to be passive recipients. And so learning that while also trying to be like a decent human being, like at some point, like there's enough conflict between the two ideas that like I couldn't stay a part of that community anymore. And Julia, you and I both have pretty strong personalities. And so like one of the things that's been really neat about our relationship is figuring out together, like, what are ways that we want to work together to solve problems, that it's not just on me as the man. And I can't expect the female partner to sit back. Like, both of us are really smart. Both of us have our own like strengths. And how can we build a relationship based off of that? Based off of what we're good at, based off of what our interests are, our passions are, those kinds of things. So as it pertains to menstrual health, it gets back again to this idea of purity. That menstruation is like representative of like the curse of Eve. I did hear that growing up.
You did.
I did too, actually.
Yeah, that this is the way that women are punished. Now they have
eating an apple.
Eating an apple.
I know.
From a snake.
What the heck?
And not stomping on its head.
What pagan nonsense. Yeah.
I know. So anyway, yeah, that would be.
Yes, and pain by gender, like women feeling pain versus men feeling pain, was that at all prescribed?
Pain wasn't really discussed. There was the pain. Really, the pain that was discussed was the pain of Jesus.
Always.
Loved our really, good crucifixion.
Yeah.
Super sadistic. Poor Jesus.
Did you say I was going to say sadistic? It's
Oh,
pretty sadistic.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's like Hellraiser.
And like Christians don't like the kinky people, but I'm like, y'all are obsessed with some like sadism and masochism.
Sure are.
Right.
Sure are.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a great way to
Right?
put it. I like it.
Yeah, the blood, you were talking about the blood of Jesus, and it's so funny because it should be like the blood of Mary, who had like a magical baby.
And
or something.
and there are
The blood of
definitely
Mary, the menstrual blood.
and there
Right.
are cults that are, or there are little I said cults. Let me try that again. There are small groups of people who, of women who have tried to reclaim periods by venerating Mary Magdalene.
Mm-hmm.
There's a group in France that I was reading about earlier today that does that. So,
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
Well, Mary
Yeah.
Magdalene or Virgin Mary or both Marys?
Right.
All the
both.
Marys.
Both. Okay.
Both Marys.
Yeah.
Mary. Quite
Yeah.
contrary. This also brings up, speaking of gender roles, and marriage, and I think you said something earlier. I'm so curious about, Jeremiah, that sex before marriage and where that fits into sexual expression in in evangelical
Right.
viewpoint.
Well, so the whole idea of abstinence only is education. So not having sex before you get married. First of all, the expectation is that is limited to penis and vagina sex. That doesn't include or talk about other types of sex between two people, oral sex, masturbation, digital stimulation, anal sex, any of that. It also assumes that sex is going to happen between people of the opposite sex, as opposed to and silences folks who are seeking same-sex either relationships, sexual experiences, or both. And one of the things that happens when you stop talking about something, or when there are mandates about not talking about things, when you start talking about sex, there's a whole bunch of other things that you're going to end up talking about too. And that includes, but is not limited to, menstrual health. Includes, but not limited to, pain, to able-bodiedness, disabilities, things like that. The second thing is that the more that you put limits around sex and sexuality, the more people are going to like explore it. The more that actually creates eroticism. The more that creates desire. You know, we find this like American history, like this is the whole purpose of the Prohibition period, and the creation and development of moonshine, right? Something similar happens with sex and sexuality. When you silence sex, you are encouraging people to explore, but also to make moonshine. Absolutely,
metaphor. Yeah,
but also to make moonshine without any sort of directions.
Oh, right. Of course. Yes.
Like you have to figure it out through explicitly through experimentation, through porn, through all these other things. So, as opposed to like having a more explicit structure about sex education, which includes everything from correct anatomical body parts and physiology, and being able to use those language, communication skills, negotiation skills, pleasure, etc.
Yes, but so in evangelical present day, or in Pentecostal, is that the right denomination that you two are with? That is what is prescribed as the attitude towards sex before marriage.
Don't do it.
Yeah. There are eternal consequences for people who do it. That sexual sins are seen as sins, quote, are seen as the most severe.
Right. And there tends to be like two different ways that don't do it gets played out. Multiple ways, but two dominant ways. One being you do everything except penetration because sex equals penetration. So, just everything else on the table, but you're a good virgin if you don't. Or if you're like me, you grew up with this like hierarchy and competition around purity. So the women in my community who were like most revered were the ones who were saving their first kiss until marriage. Or like the progressive ones who would be like, well, that doesn't seem like a great idea, so I'm just going to wait till I get engaged. And that's like very progressive of me. So there's either the like everything but, or like a competition, of course, among women and women, because only two genders in the church, the competition around women being like the purest that you can be.
Julia, would you say that while you were in it, you recognized the competition? Because I am thinking back and know of an adult who waited until the altar for her first kiss. And yeah, but I don't think that they would have used that language, that it was a competition of purity. I think it was like, and now, I mean, obviously you're outside of it, you understand it now in such a different capacity. But I love that that language, because that's what it is. It is a competition. But I am not sure. Like, I'm thinking back to these people and the relationships I had. I was there. I saw it. I watched it go down at this wedding. But yeah, what do you think about that?
Yes and no. I also grew up in a very insular community. I wasn't technically homeschooled, but I was essentially homeschooled. And the reason that this relates is because I had only two other girls in my grade, and then women. And we were the golden three. And I was acutely aware of how the three of us were pitted against each other. And so in that sense, I was somewhat aware of the ways that evangelical communities, reinforce patriarchy by pitting women against each other. In terms of sexuality, I was somewhat aware, but it wasn't until leaving that I saw the extremeness of the purity competition.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Oof.
Yeah, wild. I sort of dropped into you playing that character who waited till engagement, like is very proud of herself.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Watch a whole conversation of you playing all those characters.
Yes. And
What a world.
I wasn't, I at one point was going to be that person. I wasn't, but I still thought that the ways that I was approaching sexuality with my now ex-husband, I really had the idea that I was very progressive and evolved in my views of sexuality. And I tell this story quite a bit. My first session in sex therapy, great sex therapist, God bless Nancy McGrath forever. She asked me about my growing up experiences, and I said, well, I basically grew up in this weird cultish community, but I don't think it really impacted my sexuality all that much. And then I think back on that, and I'm like, she was such a great sex therapist. I believe she's still practicing, and I just wonder what was going on in her mind, and like the patience and kindness and intellect to sit with that and be like, oh,
Tell me some more about that. Yeah.
Interesting.
What does that mean to you? Yeah, I could see all of those.
But here I am in sex therapy, deeply distressed about my sexuality, but I don't think it's about my growing up experience.
Nope. Doesn't relate back to that at all. Nope. Oh my gosh. I love it. Sending love to younger
Thank you.
Julia.
Thank you. It's helpful to look at it with both humor and sadness. There's definitely grief, but as we know in the field of sexual health, that we have to laugh about some things.
I mean, if we don't.
Sex is funny. Sex is very funny.
Yeah.
But back to what cracked you open, Julia, or what shifted it? If you said you were kind of in it, was there something, or is there a catalyst, or was it a slow build?
Slow build, because I would say the language that's often used is deconstruction. So for lack of a better word, my deconstruction did begin in college, and I was a year younger than most of my peers, but it really took the disillusionment around marriage and sexuality to break the last wall, or if this were a Jenga tower in college, pieces of my worldview kept getting dislodged, let's say around primarily politics. And even sexuality to a degree. I became one of the progressive people who went to opening and affirming churches eventually. And so I thought that meant I had healed all of the wounds from evangelicalism. And then it was getting married, getting disillusioned, having really terrible, distressing sex, even with a wonderful, lovely partner. And that was the last Jenga piece that caused the tower to crumble.
Yeah. sex matters. And so recentering so many conversations around sex and where you are now, what is it you hope to like share to our listeners today? Is there anything you'd like to like share with them who might be on an earlier part of their journey?
Ooh.
It's a great question.
Good question. You can go slow. What I hear from a lot of people and what I experienced was like when I started receiving language and resources and tools, I had the thought, rightfully so, that I lost so much of my life and I wanted and needed to reclaim it. And there can be a lot of pressure that once you step outside, the church walls, that you just like the church says, you know exactly how to engage sexually. You know what's happening with your menstruation. You know all these things, and you've got to experience them right away. And it takes a lot of time, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I would add, particularly for listeners who are religious, who are involved in some sort of religious community, that talking about sex, and especially talking about comprehensive sex education, so talking about consent, talking about honesty, like really paying attention to what it is that you need, being able to communicate that. Talking about mutual pleasure and moving out. We haven't even talked so far about the idea that religious sexual experiences have been almost exclusively about reproduction.
Yep.
And so, like, moving out of that idea, hey, that sex is pleasurable. That conversation inherently is going to move you forward in some capacity in the deconstruction. Try it again. That conversation will move you forward and really impact your relationship with religion in some sort of a way. And so I would echo, Julia, what you're saying about going slow, taking your time, that there's a lot of things that there's a lot of layers to the onion that will be pulled back. And sometimes that's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll be in spaces, I've had my experiences with this, I know you have too, about like, how the hell did I miss this?
Yeah.
But be kind to yourself. It's not your fault that you didn't pick up this information about sex, about bodies, about menstruation, and to be kind to yourself, be gentle with yourself during the process.
Yeah. May I add one more thought that's more specific about menstruation?
Please.
So especially in the sex therapy world, there are some new trends towards language around divine masculine and divine feminine, which is essentially a repurposing of Christian language, but with like this new age progressive thing. And then I see within the divine masculine and the divine feminine, this like glamorization of menstrual health, and that you put on your white dress and you dance around in a field and like you are empowered and like you are bleeding, but it is like God, and just like hold on to that divine feminine. And the other thing that I would add is like, you don't need to feel empowered on your period. If you do, then that's great. Good for you. But the repackaging of the divine masculine and feminine, and then the implication that both glamorizes and sanitizes your menstruation is pretty damaging. And so, like, curl up in bed and like eat your ice cream. Like that's fine.
And enjoy it.
And then like, yeah. And be like, well, it sucks, but like, I'm at least going to like get the ice cream.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the chocolate.
Yeah.
So you don't need to be empowered on your period. I would say that would be the one thing I would add more specifically to menstruation.
Yeah. No need to fight through it. We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
Like, we're not going to fight through it. Like, just chill the fuck out. Like, eat the ice cream.
Yeah.
Eat the ice cream.
Eat the ice cream.
Yeah. It's real. It's just real. It's reality is the most mind-altering drug, right? I think Ted Tomlin said that, but it's just like, it's just what's really happening as opposed to light chasing. Well, there's a comedian we've talked about a lot. Just get back on that horse. You're fine. Like, what if you don't want to get on the horse?
Right.
You just want to focus on bleeding.
Yeah.
That's valuable too.
Yeah. Get your heating pad.
Yeah. Oh, I love a heating pad. There's literally one right down there. I love it so much.
Oh, love the tools of the trade being bleeding or hormone flow, because even some of us who do not bleed have hormonal flow, even including Jeremiah. We didn't get to talk about what it's like as a man to have hormones and a daily flow versus a monthly flow. We didn't get to talk about pleasure and sex. I feel like we have more to talk about. Perhaps we'll have to have a part two-er, a return to the convo, a deeper dive. We're getting close to our time. So I just want to make sure, is there anything else for this episode that you'd like to share or add?
Normalize the straight talk. I was reflecting on our hiking experience. We hiked 500 miles this summer. So it was over 6 weeks. So I had my menstruation. I don't do social media, but Jeremiah does, and a lovely person that we hire. But Jeremiah was experimenting on Threads. I learned what that was over the summer. And I told him, I was like, I want you to quote me on Threads. And I would just say like more menstrual talk from Jules. So one of them was about like sneezing out my tampon. And then like, hey, PSA, any hikers who menstruate and you know when you're in a torrential downpour and then like your pad and your tampon are like soaked with blood and water and it's just like extra heavy, like good job hiking menstruators. So, just like talk about the everyday experiences. Like who hasn't sneezed out a tampon at one point? Like who hasn't?
I mean, when those things are full, they're coming right out, Like,
right.
Being able to laugh, absolutely.
Right, and it's funny. Like,
it's hilarious. I think it's hilarious. Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
I like to think of it like inking, like an
octopus.
Like
Yes.
I love that.
So yeah, just finding ways to laugh. I was reading. I wanted to share this in the Talmud, which is written in the 3rd century. There is a section that is written to women, and if women sees a snake, if women sees a snake, she should, and I quote, take some of her hair and her fingernails and throw them at the snake and say, "I am menstruating."
Wait, I'm sorry. Is this really happening?
This is really in the Talmud. Yep.
We need that.
I'm going to go reenact that. I'm going to go find a snack just to reenact that.
Perfect.
Thank you for letting us know that exists as part of a holy scripture. God says to do it. Okay.
I was cracking up in the library reading that this morning. I'm petrified of snakes.
I love that.
And so, Julia, next time we see a snake,
you better get your hair and your nails.
I will.
Ready.
I don't mind the snakes. As a woman who ate the apple from the snake, like I'm totally cool with the snakes. I will throw my hair and fingernails at it.
Thank you.
Wow. And even if I'm not menstruating, I'll just say that I am.
Just say it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. How's the snake?
Snake doesn't know.
Snake doesn't know.
That's a fucking reptile. It doesn't know.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Thank you for that. I really want that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Yes. Which the picture of like a person throwing it at the snake.
Yeah.
All right, let's get on it.
Merch for you. Yeah.
Every once in a while, we're like, that needs to be on a shirt. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that.
So good. Cheers. Well, we'll be back with more with the Sexvangelicals, obviously, in the future, and more next month with a running coach. Stay tuned for more Flow. Flow is produced by Bloodstream Media and edited by Kay Vermeil. Shout out to Flow's creative director Amy Board and hosts Jessica Richmond and Sarah Watson. New episodes are available the second Thursday of each month.
Hey, that's the day after I start menstruating.